Well, folks, welcome back to Through A Scottish Prism. Great to have you back again. I hope you and yours are all well. And everything's going fine for you. I'm here in sunny downtown Dubai. Too hot for me. I'm telling you, too hot. But there are bonuses, e.g. my grandchildren, etc. I've got a wee bit of a cold, so if I'm a wee bit blocked up today, I apologise. But I'm joined today with one of my favourite guests. I've had him on before, and I'm sure we'll have him on again. Written some great articles for myself, for Ian Lawson, and it's none other than Professor Alf Baird. Alf, welcome back to Through A Scottish Prism. Lovely to see you again. How are you?
I'm fine, Roddy. How are you?
Well, apart from a wee bit of a cold, we're fine. We're getting spoiled by grandchildren, so what's not to like? It's quite appropriate today, actually. We're doing this interview, ladies and gentlemen, on the 18th of September, the 7th anniversary of the terrible day where we had the opportunity for nationhood and we let it slip through our fingers. So there's mixed feelings today for me, Alf. I don't know about you, but thinking back 7 years, it seems like 70 years as well as 7 months. The time flies, and it's not been good time.
Yeah, it was an odd sort of day. That the day after it was like a wake. I think somebody said it was like the death of a nation. And I think a lot of people were very adversely affected by that psychologically. And I don't think that's really been analysed in any great depth. I think I know people that actually affected their careers, it affected their daily lives, it affected their future. They just couldn't attune to the disaster, as it were. So it affected a lot of people. And for my own part, that's what motivated me to write the book. You know, the Downhodden.
Get it up there, get it up, mate. There we go, Downhodden.
And put together the framework, because I was trying to figure out, why is this? Is it just a case of Darling versus Salmond, or is there something deeper here? It's not about personalities; it's about other things. And really, yeah, I listened to all sorts of voices, including Cambridge Analytica, who came up with a key thing, which is to do with emotion, and as well as identity. And that's what I found in the research, and what Edinburgh University found as well in the post-referendum research. It's all about identity and emotion. And when you boil it down to it, came down to, do you feel more Scottish or more British? And that was it. And how do you feel more Scottish or more British? Well, that's to do with your culture, your language, your socialisation, your background, your family, your heritage, your history, all these aspects. It's nothing to do with the economy. And we had all these scare stories about pensions and currency and defence, EU. It was nothing to do with that. When it comes down to it, it's down to that thing, emotion. And it's about, do you feel more Scottish than British? And that brings us back to the ethnic question.
Well, you're right. It had an effect on lots of people and their lives and careers, etc. For me, on the 19th of September, 2014 is when I decided to move to Catalonia. And that's, I'd been swithering Willow winter. And I knew that if we'd gone yes, no way was I going to leave, health or otherwise. But there we are. So we've moved on from that. We're now in this position where since that time, we've had 6 mandates and no referendum, and people are shouting for a referendum. But I'm now in the camp, down to your good self, I'm in the camp now where I think a referendum is a mistake. I don't think it's the way to go. And for the reasons that you have outlined, both in your book and in subsequent articles and in our discussions. But there's people still resistant to that. Very much, Alf. Now, on the fact of the matter is, whether we like it or not actually, but Scotland is colonised. It is a colony of the Greater England project. Now, as you know from my blog, a certain wonderful contributor to my blog, Gail Miller, gets very upset, and I understand why. You both actually agree. You're viciously agreeing or ferociously agreeing with each other, but coming from different angles. We are not a colony per se. but we are actually a colony, are we not?
Yes. Well, what I found in the research was, yes, constitutionally we're not, but politically we are.
Yes.
And in all the terms of reality. And when you look at the definition of colonialism, it's not so much about settler occupation. It's more about political control and economic exploitation. You can have colonialism without settler occupation. That's not the key factor here. The key factor is who controls your politics and your economy, and who is plundering your economy while you're watching and leading to your inequality. And this can also lead to, well, colonialism also involves imperialism, which is cultural and linguistic. And Scotland has a long history of linguistic and cultural oppression, which is ongoing. The BBC is a great example. But the fact that people are deprived their own language. So I'm rediscovering Scots as I get older because it was driven out of me in primary school. You know, we go into schools as Scots bairns with a Scots tongue in our head, and it's driven out of us. We're made into Anglophones. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? And does it change our identity? And of course it does. And that's what what's designed to do. So imperialism, whether it's cultural, linguistic, or any other form, is a form of oppression, as is colonialism, exploitation, political, and all the rest of it. So there's a whole range of things there which reflect the fact that Scotland, constitutionally, we might say we're not a colony, but that's kind of immaterial in regard to how you've been treated for 300 years.
Good. Well, I mean, if you've got to ask permission of your next door neighbour to hold a referendum to decide how you should be governed, that kind of says you're a colony.
Well, that's what Gareth Wardell said at the Alba conference. He said, you know, who makes the big decisions for Scotland? It's nobody in Scotland. It's not even Nicola Sturgeon. It's somebody else. It's somebody out with Scotland. So all the key institutions and key organisations and the key policy decisions are not made by Scotland for Scotland. They're made elsewhere.
Yeah, and of course, when you rear up against it or show an objection to it and say, well, I actually think we'd be better off looking after ourselves, you're immediately called a racist, anti-English. It's just because you hate the English. Say, no, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want us to take our decisions. I don't dislike them, or I'm not anti them. I just think we should be pro us. Oh, no, you're a racist. And that's what they do to you.
Yeah. Well, in the book, what I found was there are two forms of racism affecting the Scots. And this goes back to something Gail mentioned about the colonial mindset. And in post-colonial literature, the colonial mindset is a well-established aspect of colonialism. The people, the native people, are told that they're inferior. They're informed that their culture is inferior, their language is invalid. And if their language is invalid, the people become invalid. And then you then recruit a meritocracy that reflects the cultural, the superior culture, if you like, which is Anglophone in our case. So this colonial mindset leads to that, what we call the cringe, but it's what I found it's defined in the science as internalized racism, which is also known as appropriated racial oppression, where an oppressed people regard their oppression as deserved. Now, this is well established with minorities around the world. Who are marginalized, put to the side. Their language is marginalized, their culture, everything about them. So when we talk about a colonial mindset, we're into the realms of some really interesting science, which if you look at some of the post-colonial literature coming out of the African colonization and independence movements, you find that basically colonialism is regarded as a disease of the mind, more than anything. It's also about political and economic exploitation, but it's also a disease of the mind, which the colonized people have to cast out. They have to cast that out. But first of all, they have to understand what their oppression's about. And this is what the point I was making in the article the other day, post the Alba conference, was if we're making a case for our freedom and our independence, we should really know what it's about. And fundamentally, it's about decolonization, which what the UN call independence.
Yeah.
That's why they have a committee called the Decolonisation Committee.
Yeah.
You know, we're not actually saying anything new. So the forms of racism that affect colonized people are, one is internalized racism. The other factor here is that colonialism itself is racism. It's about making a culture and a language and a people inferior.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about putting in place a meritocracy that reflects the culture of the superior.
Yeah.
And that's the root of our inequality.
Yeah. And there's no point in just having, it's not on, you're right. The point you make is that it shouldn't be about independence for policies, e.g. £5 in your pension, £2 in your welfare check. It should be about, you know, colonisation, language, culture, all those things. I like a good analogy. And the one I put is it's like, you know, the child who's being abused by Uncle Tim. And she goes to and says, well, you know, I don't like this, what Uncle Tim's doing. You know, and you go, oh, how can you say about Uncle Tim? He's a good guy, he loves you and takes good care of you and gives you this and presents and nice. No, you've been terrible. Stop it. You're the bad person. He's fine. And that's what happens to us as soon as we say, well, no, this isn't right. What's happening to us? I don't like it. I don't want it to happen anymore or continue. And you're told, no, you're the bad person. You mustn't complain. You're lucky. You're subsidised. You know, we give you all these jobs. We let you, you know, have oil in your water. We let you have whiskey.
Well, the colonialism methodology also means that the colonial power gives things now and again to the native people that makes them feel wanted, feel that the colonial power is looking after their interests in some way, giving them little bits of crumbs off the table, as it were. But that's pretty much all it is.
Correct. And what we've got, Holyrood has become a colonial office. It really has. They have stopped actually progressing the case of radical Scottish independence and have become the governorship for English imperial rule. That's just the reality. I mean, people can deny it. They can call me what they like, say what they like, but that is the reality, is it not, Alf?
Well, in the post-colonial literature, I'm sorry to keep harking back to it, but it's very interesting because it gives you the framework of what happens. And we have a template for decolonization. And the first stages of the decolonization process is where the people vote for a dominant national party. They make that party dominant, but that national party has other interests in line, not just the people's interests. They have their own interests to look after. And so then we get into the reality that the dominant national party reaches its own accommodation with the colonial power. And that's where we are with the SNP or the new SNP. They've reached that accommodation, which means they're not going to rock the boat too much. They're just going to settle into that kind of equilibrium. And independence is not a priority now. I think people in recent weeks have found that members of the SNP, a lot of them, yourself, you've found as well, some members of the SNP don't prioritise independence anymore. Well,
actually, I was going to say a few of the SNP members do prioritise independence now. There's the majority that don't. That's what I'm finding.
Yeah, I think also in post-colonial literature, what you also find is the different social groups in the society go into reflect different priorities. So you've got the bourgeoisie that's always gone into the pro-colonial camp, as it were, and we have that in Scotland big time. But then you've got the proletariat that, because their salaries might depend on the colonial power, public sector pay and all the rest of it, a lot of them go into that camp. So that's pretty much more the middle classes. And then you've got the lumpen proletariat. And I would say that's where the root of the independence movement is. It's what Alex Salmond found when he was talking about Dundee in 2014. He was standing in Dundee and he said on 12 Heads the other day, well, a while back, that people were queuing up to register to vote. And they were registering to vote for the first time ever. One guy hadn't registered to vote since the poll tax. They had just completely gone out of the way. And the reason they were registering to vote is because they said there was something to vote for. Independence. Up until then, there was nothing to vote for.
And they haven't voted since.
What you've got is it's the working class. The roots of the independence movement is the Scots-speaking working class. that knows oppression.
Yeah.
We know oppression. You know, we've lived with gas meters, try to find a shilling and all the rest of it. We've lived with all that crap, and you can't.
50p for the telly.
And people were brought up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We remember all that, and we're getting back to that now. We're getting back to the poverty. We're getting back to the marginalisation of groups of Scottish working class, underclass, whatever you want to call it. We're getting back to that inequality, and it's. I know from the university sector, having worked in it for 25 years, that's one of the areas where inequality looms large, where the elites get a free, passage into the system, and the working class can't get into it for a whole number of reasons.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the opportunities. But anyway, what I'm saying is, if you look at the ALBA audience and the ALBA membership, it's now heading towards at root the Scots-speaking working class driving the boat.
Yeah, two things there you've reminded me. I'm going to, when I finish this interview, I'm going to go and speak to my grandchildren and see if they can believe me when I tell them that you used to have to find a 50 pence to get the TV working. 50 pence in the TV. You remember the TVs?
Yeah.
But the other one is that got me today, when it's a sort of a hot potato today of all days, where they've allowed, I think it's 38 orange walks in Glasgow. And just going back to what you said there, those disgraceful spectacles, as I don't know what else I could call them, they don't allow them to go through. They don't go through Newton Mearns or Bearsden or Broomhill or Highland. They go through the working class areas because they can have it. Because the middle class and the upper class, no, that's not for them. But it's the working class. They can take it. They can take the litter and the violence and the hatred and all that stuff. And there is two laws, and we have to. You're right. We have to motivate the poor. The other ones that are going to benefit the most from independence. Now, when you and I spoke, we spoke about franchise at one point of our discussion, and that has been a big bone of contention for a lot of people. And I'm totally on board. I agree with how it should be done through the UN decolonisation unit, and that they should determine. My belief is that we should have a grand assembly, whatever you want to call it, when we recall our MPs, all MSPs, all councillors of all parties, and we say Treaty of Union's over, kaput, done. We're now going to start secession talks, and we then go back to the people to ratify what we've done. And I would say those same people who agree to the cessation of the Union are the ones who say, well, if someone's lived in Scotland for 2, 5, 10, 12, 17, 19 years, it's their primary home, they've had children here, they make that decision. I'm flexible in that. I'm just opposed to people who are doing a university course, or who have a second home, or who are a soldier serving in Scotland for 9 months or a year, but they get the vote. I'm against all that. So, but it's a bone of contention with people. But I don't know if you saw today or yesterday, there was an article come out where they said, oh, no, it's all changed. The English incomers are now heading towards pro-independence with no real facts and figures to back it up. And when I asked for the data sets, they said, oh, they're there, you just look for them. I don't believe for a minute that 72% has changed by much. Do you?
Well, it's not, because, and the reason we know it's not is we know that the constituencies where the population is predominantly or has large proportion of rest UK population, and they all vote unionist in recent elections as well. So if you look at constituencies in the Borders, in Perthshire, in Orkney and Shetland, and certain other areas, Edinburgh, East Lothian, well, Edinburgh anyway, in different areas, you'll find that it's very largely a unionist vote. And that's where the population of people coming from rest UK live, in these constituencies, by and large. So I think that if they're voting for unionist parties, they're not going to vote for independence. Well, you wouldn't think and that's so. What we found in the referendum survey as well. The Edinburgh University post-referendum survey found where there was, I wouldn't say enclaves, but where there was large English populations in the Borders, for example, and as I mentioned in Highlands and Islands areas, certain areas, then they mostly voted against independence. I don't think that changes. it goes back to the key thing about identity, your national identity. What is your identity? What is your emotion? And if the vote on nationhood is basically an emotional vote, as Cambridge Analytica talked about in many other examples around the world where they've advised on as well, then that's the nuts and bolts of it. And the post-referendum survey came to the same conclusion. It was largely a vote of being either Scottish or British. And that's it. How do you feel? More British, more Scottish. And that's it. And obviously, if you come from another part of the UK, not Scotland, you're unlikely to vote for Scottish citizenship. And that's the other thing about civic nationalism. What I found in my research was that civic nationalism depends on people having a sense of belonging to a country, to that identity. That's what civic nationalism means. Now, people coming here from other countries and voting no means they don't want that citizenship. They're rejecting it. Not only that, they were blocking it for the locals. They were taking it upon themselves to prevent self-determination of the indigenous people. Some people might regard that as being quite an extreme action. So I think there's a lot to look into this. The other thing is identity doesn't change very easily. You know, when just because the French colonized Algeria didn't make all the Algerians Frenchmen. You know, and the Irish say as well that just because England controlled Ireland for many centuries didn't make the Irish English. No. You don't change your identity so easily. It's not something that can be done unless you really want to. And that's where we get into the colonial literature about assimilation. No. And cultural assimilation is about changing your identity. And this goes back to what I was saying about when Scots bairns go into schools and we're getting our Scots language driven out our heads and we're made into little Anglophones. And there's a reason for that. And it's to change your identity and your culture and your way of thinking and your emotion to a national picture, a national entity.
There's two things. When people were rejected to me, saying, "Oh, how can you say that? You live in Catalonia." I said, well, I wouldn't get a vote. I live in Catalonia, so I wouldn't get the vote. But if I talk about Catalonian independence, I live there. I've chosen to live most of the year there, not all the year, but most of the year I'm there. And while I empathise with their position and sympathise with their position, I do not expect, and quite rightly, to be allowed to vote on it, to have a say in it. I pay taxes there. I live there. I've employed workmen there to do all sorts of stuff. I put money into the local economy. I'm paying taxes. But it's not my right to say how they should be governed. I've gone there for life reasons, whatever my reasons are. How dare I suggest that, well, I'm going to decide if you'll be governed from Barcelona or Madrid? When you try and say that to Scottish people...
Well, the UN seem quite clear on this as well. They talk about to prevent interference in self-determination. And interference includes interference by peoples of other nations and other nationalities. And you're right, you know, I've worked in different parts of the world, Germany, Norway, Oman, Japan. I would never expect a vote on their sovereignty. No. And that's the other thing is your vote on this question of independence, it's a question of sovereignty. And so your sovereignty is something that should be protected, not given away. And if we have to remember here, and the other part of the book is about demographics, and our demographics are fundamentally changing and have been changing for the last couple of 100 years, quite significantly, with mostly Scots leaving and mostly people coming in from other countries, primarily from England. Now, that means that the demographics have fundamentally changed. The problem, the reason why other countries have a national franchise, that's franchise only for nationals, is to protect their sovereignty. Yeah. Because if a country like Denmark, for example, had a couple of million Germans suddenly appearing, and they were all then given a vote on Danish sovereignty, they might just say, well, we think Denmark should be part of Germany again. Yeah. You know, and we think, you should advertise all your best jobs in Berlin. And oh, by the way, you should speak German instead of Danish, get rid of your Danish language. Forget that. So all of a sudden you see the picture. protection of sovereignty is fundamental to any nation.
Yeah.
But without independence, Scotland has no protection of its sovereignty. So
Yeah.
we talk a lot about sovereignty, but actually every day we're leaking sovereignty.
Yeah.
With an open franchise and with no control over population.
Correct, we've got to do both. But there's another thing, I was talking on the racism earlier and our identity being eroded. I noticed you had another very good article in the Herald about the Scottish private schools who have been assuring parents from other parts of the country and from Scotland that their children won't end up with a Scottish accent if they go to the private schools in Scotland. I believe you put that in it. It was in the Herald today, I believe.
It wasn't mine. It might have been someone I know.
There's a reference to you in it anyway. But they were saying that they have assured parents that they won't have a Scottish accent. And you're thinking, how, you know, why?
Well, actually, what this comes down to, Roddy, is basically racism. We don't talk about it. We don't talk about racism of the Scots or racism of Indigenous peoples and minority groups. And we have to remember, within the UK context, the Scots are a minority. And this is another point I raised in the article you published the other day, was that the SNP had gone down the road of prioritising all sorts of minority interests and lobby groups behind them, like Stonewall and whatnot. Whereas the rationale for independence is the protection of the rights of a minority people, which is the Scots as a whole, the Scottish people. And they are a minority ethnic group within the UK. And it's their sovereignty that's at question here. So we have to think about this in a different way. And that's why I think my point to the ALBA group was, because they were keen on setting up different groups for this and that, a bit like the SNP, and changing the focus to also different sort of policy objectives, which gets us away from independence.
Yeah.
Independence is a special purpose. Which means to me that instead of a mainstream political party, we need a special purpose vehicle.
Yep.
You need a political entity that's geared towards independence, and then delivering that independence in the early stages and making sure it works effectively.
Yep. Because
the other thing, there's a number of issues that have to be addressed when a country obviously escapes from its oppressor. It has to put in place systems and processes and make sure that the integrity of that new state is protected and respected. Therefore, that's the focus we have to do, not on objectives for this and that and laws for this and that. This is where Hollywood's gone in a different direction. It's gone law mad, law crazy, because it's lost its focus. Its focus should have been on independence, liberation, freedom, whatever you want to call it. But it should have been on that fundamental change. Instead, it's gone in a whole different host of areas. In the post-colonial literature, they call that mystification. It mystifies the people because they've lost their objective and they're gone in all different areas, and they're telling the people, we have to do this, we have to do that, we have to do this and that. And they're forgetting the focus. They're forgetting their main purpose.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I would class myself my whole life as a hardcore independentist. And I never have been hardcore thinking, well, I can get a better pension, or I could get better welfare, or I could be, a wee bit better off. It never crossed my mind, never. It is the democratic, the fact that we could make decisions for ourselves and not have someone else make them. I mean, if you ask the question, is Scotland a nation? And the answer, well, yes, it is. So why are you allowing another nation to rule it? That's not normal. It's dependence that's abnormal, not independence that's abnormal. And that's the message we need to get out to the people of Scotland. And we've got to stop being scared of calling out what's happening, calling it racism, being subjected. And, if someone's siding with the other side, what does that make them? That does make them a traitor. And if you use that, you can't call them traitors. Well, what do you call them? What should we call them? Yeah,
well, this is it. In colonialism, there's always groups that will undermine liberation. Always groups. I mean, Africa's full of examples where you stick a few dollars in a wee laddie's hand, he'll pull out a gun. That's how crazy the situation is in some places where poverty really is bad. But we have to, I think, understand what independence really is. And that was the point of the article. You have to understand what independence is. And we then get into the realms of the UN decolonization process, which is what independence is. And that's the reality of the situation. Constitutionally, of course, your friend Gail has argued that we need to talk about sovereignty, which is fine. But the likelihood is that would end up in courts, probably. And you can never really guarantee a good outcome, certainly not in a Scottish court, never mind a UK court. And the other point about international law is that quite a few countries don't adhere to international law. The UK is one of them. Mm-hmm. So you have to be careful what's being done there. And I think the route to independence is much more in line with what Alba were suggesting about a plebiscite and taking it from there and seeing how that goes and whether that can be effectively done. The UN option then comes in if that is blocked somehow. And then we really are into the force of colonialism. Colonialism really is force.
And if the UK government was to try and block the UN coming in, because let's be honest, you can't, was it someone, the famous man said, you can't look forward without looking back. London, the Westminster, the English government has always tended to, overreact and lose. They always lose, but they overreact. Now, if they were to say, no, we're not allowing the UN in, what then?
Well, I think independence happens with, certainly in post-colonial literature, it happens when the administrative power or the colonial power gives up, basically. It's not worth the hassle. It's no longer worth the hassle. So I think what Alba has to do is, and what the people have to do is keep at it, keep going. If anything, intensify, the strategy, the demonstrations, in a sense. I know that post-COVID and COVID prevented a lot of that, but that's keeping it high on the agenda. Of course, they're able to keep it out of the media. They're able to keep a lot of the momentum out of the mainstream media, which is to their advantage. But the alternative media, such as yourself and others, which is under attack, and that's another feature. That's another feature of colonial oppression. Is the anti-colonial movement will always be will always be blocked in any way that the colonial power can do, and that's what they're doing with Craig Murray as well, particularly.
Absolutely. What's annoying is that when some so-called independentista MPs and MSPs are attacking the pro-independence media, I
well, again, going back to the post-colonial literature, what the dominant national party is usually regarded as in the decolonization process is a gang. They're basically a gang, and that's how they act. They're there for their own advantage. They're not there for the betterment of the people. They're no longer representing the people's interests. We gave them the last throw of the dice in May.
Yeah,
that was the last, and it was only because Alex said, back them. Yeah. And we did the SNP Alba, a lot of us.
Never happened again.
For one reason or another, it never happened. But what we could see is that's the last chance saloon for them. They're going to become like Labour pretty quick, I would imagine, because we didn't have a lot of time.
Nope.
And the sooner that they disappear, the better, if either through elections or other means. But we have to have fundamental change.
I agree. I was talking about this in another programme last night, and I think 2024, 23, whenever the next UK general election comes along, I think it's likely to be 23. Because they're putting through something through Westminster just now, which will effectively get rid of I forgot what you call that bill again, but it'll go back to Prime Minister being able to call an election whenever he wants again. And I think he's likely to go in 23. And when they do, it's an excuse not to another referendum for the SNP. But I think that's when Alapa has to make its big move, and it either takes over from the SNP or removes the SNP, and we have to start building after that general election up again. But the SNP are no longer, in my opinion, long term, can be part of this this quest. They have given up the right to lead the movement. They have betrayed the movement.
They no longer talk the independence.
No. Sad.
I mean, they talk about everything else, but independence.
Yeah. And I speak as someone who joined the party in 1968. It breaks my heart. But I suppose it's the Labour Party, who've been talking about abolishing the House of Lords since, I don't know, since they came into being, and they never did. And they used to be socialist. You know, they used to be socialist, the Labour Party. Did you know that? That's honest.
Well, that's the other thing about independence. It's neither about right or left.
No.
And this is what the post-colonial literature tells you about as well. Socialists, people of the left, even amongst the colonizer, will often want to be part of that process of liberation.
Mm-hmm.
But they soon realize that it's not a matter of social policies. It's not a matter of political ideology. It's about liberation of a people. And that's what has to be done first before anything else. So I think that's where the focus of ALBA has to be, with the caveat that other policies have to be in place that will ease the process. Mm-hmm. Because when you're changing an organization, I look at Scotland like an organization. Like if I'm studying a business organization, as I used to do one time for a living, but it's like an organization. It needs a strategy, it needs a structure, but it needs to have a focus on its key objective. Mm-hmm. And if it gets diverted on all different other objectives, then it will lose its focus. It also has to have the right people in place. And I think with Alex Salmond and other people, and Chris McElhinney, he's getting together the right group, and Kenny McCaskill and so on, and yourself on the NEC.
Oh, you're too kind, sir.
So he's got that nucleus, and there's so many other people, great speakers at the conference.
Oh, it was fabulous.
That we can identify with in a Scottish sense, even in a Scottish ethnic sense. but that's what independence is about. It's about us. It's not about another folk. It's nothing to do with the colonizer.
No. And it's their feelings. If their feelings get upset, tough luck.
Well, that's right. That's right. Going back to the franchise, the New Caledonia franchise was interesting as well, because quite a lot of residents who had maybe come out there from France for the good life and so on, they were told that they couldn't vote unless they had been there for the last referendum in the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
Or a previous referendum. So the length of residence might actually need to be longer than some people think.
Yeah.
Sorry, especially when we're talking about quite a substantial population change.
Sorry, I'm coughing away here like a madman. Which I'm just as well we're coming towards the end, because my cough is beginning to catch up on me again. And originally I brought, excuse me, to speak about free ports, but we'll have to do that at another time. Just going on as a last thought, Alf, what would you like to see happen if Alec Salmond phoned you up tomorrow and said, "Listen, I want you to take over tomorrow, Alf. The party have agreed." What would you like to see put in place to get us to the next layer, the next level?
Well, I think what the recent series of papers that I published with Ian Lawson on News for Scotland, there was a call there for some of these papers to be put together in a booklet, which I'm hopefully working towards. But that brings me to Alex's strategy on it. I do think that he needs a booklet as such, and he's talking about Robin McAlpine and Stuart Campbell collaborating to do that. But I think they really need to also have a focus on informing the population what independence really is. And it's not about political choices on this and that. It is about liberation of a people from oppression and decolonization as well. So I think they have to focus on that to some extent. I think there is a need to explain to the people the reality of their their state, if you like. And we shouldn't be embarrassed by the term colonialism.
No.
We should be disgusted by it, because it's a scourge. It's a form of punishment. Mm-hmm. That's what the UN describe it as. Mm-hmm. And that's why they developed the self-determination process, so people can free themselves from the scourge of oppression. Mm-hmm. And that's what we have. And that's why we're always looking over our shoulder to the big decision maker who is not in our country. And we need to stop that.
Maybe myself and my fellow bloggers need to think about crowdfunding this pamphlet of yours put out to talk about colonialism and what independence is really all about. But we shall see. That's maybe a discussion for another day. Alf, I've got to thank you. I know I've actually overrun, and Techie will be getting me into trouble. I teach you strictly 30 minutes.
Well, it's nice speaking to you again, Roddy.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. It's never a chore, Alf. Never a chore.
Always remember, Dubai was a former colony, and it's got these great big dry docks now and a big container terminal.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this. Well, I want next time you come on, we'll talk about ports, because it's really something that I'm very interested to get the old Baltic ports going again. But
yeah, well, I always say, I remember is the trade, and trade is the economy.
Absolutely. There was one time I was in my local pub in Barhead, and one of the lads came up to me and he said, "You go to Dubai a lot, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, my kids and grandkids are there." He said, "I've just got a cracking holiday out there, dirt cheap." So who are you? He says, "Oh, Eminent Airlines, right from Glasgow." And he told me, I can't remember what the price was, but it was really, I said, "That is reasonable." "How long are you going for?" He said, "A fortnight." I said, "When are you going?" He said, "July, for a fortnight." Oh, dear. I said, "I now know why you got it cheap." And it was actually at the time when Ramadan was right in the bang in the middle of the Glasgow Fair.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, you're not going to let the." He said, "Oh, I love the heat. I love the heat." I said, "No." He come back in. He was whiter than me when he came back in. And he said, "Oh," he said, "it was murder." And I'm here in September, heading towards October, and it's I'm hardly out the door. It's too bloody hot. I've got this bloody cold because of the air conditioning. Anyway, I'm digressing and I'm overshooting. I know Techie in the background's going mental. Alf, it's been great. Thank you for everything, and thank you for everything you do. It is vital, and I know it changed my perception, and I hope now I can help change other people's perception. And I hope we can all work collectively to do that. And I'm not kidding about maybe we need to think about that pamphlet beside the wee Alba book, to get one of those in. And yeah, I'm liking that idea. But anyway, thank you, Alf, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed Alf and what he's had to say as much as I have. And until I speak to you all again, you know what to do. You and yours, please take care. Bye now.
Bye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.